Our guest today is John Astin, psychologist, author, and singer-songwriter of original spiritual contemplative music. So today we're interviewing John Astin, a friend of yours, someone that you've been involved with his teachings for a while. Can you give us a little background?
John's a friend of mine, number one. I go back 15 years with John. We were both involved with Candace O'Denver's Balanced View cult. And he was being groomed, John, to be a trainer. That was a very high position in that organization. I was just a regular slob, But we both became disaffected, just the same way I became disaffected with our guru way back when. I became disaffected with this guru, Candace O'Denver. And so we left around the same time. John went on to establish his own teaching. He's a teacher. He's a musician. He's a brilliant guy. He's a very entertaining guy. And we've had him as a guest on our, I've mentioned this before, POK or Perfectly OK organization that I belong to. We have guest speakers. So John has been with us a few times. I'm looking forward to talking to him because he's a very interesting guy, has a lot to say, and he's very involved with something that I'm also involved with, and that is the teachings of Peter Brown, the Dzogchen style teachings, non-duality. John is a non-dual, one of these non-dual teachers.
So really, we're coming back to it's all about non-duality here.
Well, yes, it is all about non-duality. I think from John's point of view, we'll ask him, is it all about non-duality? Certainly from my point of view, I'm very clear. It's all about non-duality. But, we have other people who it's not about non-duality. That's why we're interviewing a whole bunch of people from different points of view. Non-duality is it, from my point of view. From somebody else's point of view, they can have their own point of view.
I'm not totally in line with, but I'll learn. I'm a fast learner.
Well, we'll see. In other words, I'm not trying to impose something. I want John or any guest. We've had Jerry Katz. We've had a number of guests, and the idea that we have is like let them guide the thing what they want to talk about. I don't know what John's going to talk about. I did not discuss that with him, but I know from knowing John that his viewpoint is one of non-dual. But I'm going to bring up something. He's also a psychotherapist, so obviously psychotherapy. And we're going to be talking to another therapist next week, Marianne, your friend, who's a psychotherapist. So what's more dualistic than okay, I'm here and you're telling me your problems and I'm trying to help you out. That's very dualistic. So we want to like have a balance here between the dualistic point of view and the non-dual point of view. And I think John is the perfect guy to talk about this because he's a therapist. He's a scholar. He's published many tracks on mindfulness meditation and stuff. And he's also, from my point of view, he's a non-dual teacher. So let's see how he balances that.
So, first of all, Marianne, who we're having on next week with Robert, is a psychologist, and she does see clients as a psychologist. John is also a psychologist, correct? He's a professor of psychology.
Yeah, I just don't make that distinction. Okay, so psychotherapists and psychologists, I kind of lump them all together. So we'll have to ask him. I don't know if he's a psychologist or a psychotherapist. I know he does deal with therapy because he
Right.
helps people with their problems. That's what I mean by psychotherapist. You're helping people with their problems to have a better life.
Yeah, well, we'll probably get, people writing in or leaving comments about that.
Good. We want comments,
We
and we
do
want
want
and
comments.
we don't want people just to fall in lockstep. We want, we want to duke it out with people. So
Yeah,
yeah, have
good,
good
bad, or
comments.
indifferent, leave them.
Hey John, we were just talking about you.
Nice to see you.
Like to say hello to John. So, I
Oh,
mean, this
you
is
don't
our
know?
first meeting.
I assume you knew each other because we know John from POK and a lot of other places. And for oh, you were on
Oh,
his
Stefan. Yeah, I noticed your name now from the Zoom. Yeah.
The Zoom call. Yeah.
I wrote you a question that
Yeah.
you looked at the end of the Zoom call.
Yeah, yeah.
And uh, you had an interesting look on your face when you were reading the question, and then you ended the Zoom call.
Yeah.
So I was
I don't
curious.
remember. Sorry, I don't remember the question. Can you tell me again?
I have it because I said I want to read the question because John didn't address it. But okay, I have it
Probably just
written
because
down.
I ran out of time
Yeah, that was probably it. But I do have the question right here. Okay, here's what Stefan wrote. I had written a thing about non-dual therapy, blah blah, and so under that. So here's what Stefan wrote: Isn't the non-dual experience just a mental projection? If immersion into non-duality is a state of being, isn't it in a vibratory state which supersedes the mind, a state that allows the ego to evaporate into a state of oneness without identification with the self?
That was it. Very good, Gary.
I copied it. That's why.
You live inside my mind, Gary.
I think I mean there's a lot in that, and I think it's hard to sort of address it all at once. I think maybe we can just conversationally explore it if you want to. I'm happy to. It's a lot of things in there like ego, and I mean this is a word I never use because it's such a loaded word. In spiritual circles, it's you know perceived as the boogeyman. In psychology, it's considered to be an important aspect of development. What are we talking about when we say ego? And so I try to. A lot of my work, to be honest, is clarifying language. What do we even mean by the words that we're using? Because if we don't come to some agreement about what the words are, at least in theory, pointing to, it's impossible to sort of come to some sort of understanding. So anyway, I do a lot of trying to clarify language. So there's a lot in that would probably need to be unpacked to be able to answer it. But we could do that, certainly.
Okay,
Yeah.
but before we start, I
Yeah.
listened to your interview that you had. I listened last night to the interview you did in 2016. And it
Was
was
that
with
with
Rick
Rick
Archer.
Archer? Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, yeah.
And first of all, I want to preempt this by saying I did sit on your Zoom call for what was, I guess, the last 20 minutes or so.
Mm.
But I was really moved by your way of expressing yourself and your deep understanding of yourself, which you express not as a guru necessarily, even though I think a lot of the people sitting on the Zoom call may have interpreted you in that manner. It's, up to
Hopefully
self-interpretation.
not.
No, I understand that. And that was exactly what was impressed upon me coming from you. You were just explaining the way it is for you, and everybody else was absorbing or assimilating in a resonant way and was being enlightened in a way that was impressive. Anyway, in 2016, you did this interview, and this really was outstanding for me. I'm going to read you the whole thing, John. And this is what you said. Sitting in this first meditation at Andrew Cohen's retreat And he shared something earlier about something that his teacher, Papaji, said to him. Quote, "I'm so happy that you found a friend that you'll never see." And I was like, wow, that's a kind of trippy thing to say. So happy you found a friend you'll never see. And all of a sudden, I understood what that meant, and that I could never see this because it was what was looking. And it was just like something that just ran off inside me. And in that moment, that discovery that I had been what I was looking for was really shocking. It had this emotional impact at a certain level, this bittersweetness that I've been looking for so long, so hard, struggling, grasping, seeking for this. And all along, it was what I was. It was like, holy shit, it was mind blowing. I was weeping for a couple of days. I was so moved by it. In my second meditation, it's already been realized that this is it. I could feel it. It was most familiar feeling in me of like grasping, like looking for something other than this. And that's what I was doing. I could feel the pain of it. It was interesting because it was this whole non-dual thing, nothing about really God or devotion happening in my experience or in this retreat. The next thing that happened that I never experienced before or never afterwards was a voice that said to me right in the middle of grasping, it said, "Isn't this enough?" And it felt like really speaking to me. And then the voice went on and said, "You can feel how much grace there is in this, just as it is." And I broke down and I saw the kind of fool's errand I was on, looking for it to look a particular way. I think that was the crux of that understanding. Through all my subsequent experiences, involvement with different teachers and teachings, it's been a process of wearing away at this idea that the truth or God or reality or spirit, whatever you want to call it, looks a certain way. When I listen to other people who are attending teachings or satsangs or speaking to me one form or another, this tends to be what is the root of the question, which is it couldn't be this particular moment of discomfort or confusion. So get me out of this. And it could be in a very conventional sense, or not even a spiritual satsang type person, but just somebody who wants to feel better in their lives, psychologically or mentally or emotionally. It's like, I don't want to experience what I'm experiencing. It's uncomfortable. With a spiritual seeker, it's more complicated because there's this whole architecture or superstructure of not only is this uncomfortable, but it's definitely not an enlightened state, and it's definitely not divine. There's an additional overlay which leads to moving, in a sense, in opposition to our own experience by any other name is suffering. Well, when I heard that, it was like, wow. I had that similar experience in my own way. And it kind of like, it was so beautiful. And I'm hoping that you can go a little further on this. Maybe now it's, 7 years later after you did this thing. And do you have any thoughts about this now that you can, expound upon?
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that after all these years. Yeah, I mean, it's what I said there is very much what I'm continuing to share, in my work with people, to be sure. I say in my last book, there's two approaches to well-being, broadly speaking, that I lay out in one of the first chapters of that book. And I say in the standard approach to well-being, or if you put it in more of a spiritual context, you could say our search for whatever, freedom, awakening, enlightenment. I think the searches are in so many ways very similar. But in any case, I say in that chapter, that introductory chapter, the standard approach is driven by how we're defining experience, essentially. So here's the moment filled with all this diversity of experience and unique in its texture and its quality and its flavor in the ways that we describe it, in the ways it seems to be appearing, right? And it runs the gamut. This is the complexity of human experience. It's never the same from moment to moment. Now, ordinarily, based on how we're defining things, we kind of have these categories of like, now I've got what I'm looking for. Let's say it's well-being, a sense of happiness, fulfillment. And now I've got it because I've secured the kind of experiences and circumstances that I equate with well-being, right? Based on how I'm defining well-being and my experience. And then the moments where I feel like I've lost that well-being in some sense, it's something's missing, something is absent that I long for. Again, whether that's just ordinary human happiness and fulfillment or the spiritualized version of that, awakening, enlightenment, and so on. But all of that is being driven by what we think is going on and how we're defining the world of experience, essentially. And so in that more kind of conventional approach to well-being that I lay out in the book, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I'm doing that all the time. I'm in a sense trying to curate a life that I enjoy. You know, I seek out music that I love. I seek out relationships that feel resonant to me, and I enjoy the company of these people. Um, Absolutely. And I do what I can to steer clear of situations and circumstances and experiences that are less to my enjoyment and liking based on, who I am, right? I mean, I do this. I say in the book that if we likened our life to a dream, this standard approach to well-being is like, how do I dream the best dream possible, right? So, okay, how do I do that? I'm going to do that till my last breath, no question about it. Having conversations like this are something I enjoy. So I seek out these conversations because I enjoy them. That's part of dreaming the best dream possible, right? And the other approach to well-being, which is what my teaching in work and writing is fundamentally about, is taking a step back and asking the most profound question to me, which is not how can I create a better life, a better dream, but what is life? What is this that I'm using a metaphor as a dream? But what is life made of? What is the nature of life? I mean, isn't that amazing that that's not a question that's just front and center of every human being? But it's not. That question is just, well, I'm alive and now I'm going to try to live the best life possible. Again, nothing wrong with that. But this question of what is life, why that's so profound and ultimately transformative and liberating is that the exploration reveals this whole other, you could say, dimension of well-being or freedom or awakening, which is that all of this diversity of experience, which I've kind of categorized as the positive and negative, the good, the bad, the things I want, the things I don't want, underlying all of that, or at the basis of all of that, is life itself, is reality itself, is existence itself. And seeing that, coming to know that more intimately, reveals, I call it just sort of half jokingly, the well of being that, and the basis of all of our experience, even the ones we describe as, I don't want that one. That's definitely not well-being. That's definitely not enlightenment or awakening or whatever. It's like, no, actually, those experiences are made of the same thing that everything is made of, which is, well, we can't really say what that is, right? It's a mystery, ultimately. What is experience made of? What is the world made of? What is everything made of? I could say life, but that begs the question, right? Like, what is life? Which is, as I said, it's the liberating question of questions, because exploring that question, not conceptually merely, but experientially, what is this moment made of? What is life made of? Takes us down the rabbit hole of the pure mystery and unresolvability of what life is. And that turns out to be true of every experience. And discovering that is freedom.
Well, why? Um, I mean, I don't know how you feel about karma, action reaction to things that are done, but why doesn't everyone on this planet have that seeking need? Why are some people more prone to wake up to through the veil of illusion and feel that there's something more that they want to find, and other people are just asleep their entire life.
It's the same unanswerable question of, why are you you? Why are you the way you are? Why am I the way I am? Why are you inclined to or am I inclined to love what I love, seemingly, to be drawn to what I'm drawn to? It's funny, I'm a psychologist and a scientist by training, and I teach still in those areas. And, psychologists are and other, scientists, social scientists are very interested in explaining why human beings are the way that they are. And in the context of something like mental health, why do people struggle with the things that they struggle with, right? So we could look at, like, why am I the way I am? Try to explain it like, well, it has to do with what happened in my early life and my early childhood that shaped me, my conditioning, my biology, my DNA, the forces of society that are shaping us and conditioning and indoctrinating us in different ways. I mean, all these influences, you could say, that add up to why is Gary and John and Stefan the way we are and everyone else. But none of those answers are satisfactory, because it's much less. It's not. We're not able to determine why we are the way that we are. We are the way that we are. It's like asking, why does a tree grow that way? Well, it just does. It's its nature to grow that way, right? So as to why some people are interested in the kinds of conversations we're having and exploring reality in these ways, and others people are less interested and live their lives without necessarily getting interested in those questions, I could never know the answer to that. It's not. I may have an interest as to why more people aren't interested in exploring those questions, but I have no idea why, honestly. And it's not really. I see this with my graduate students. Some of them are very interested because I introduce this stuff into my psychology graduate classes. I kind of sneak it in there, but I don't even sneak it in there anymore. I'm pretty explicit about it now. But some of the students are like, whoa, you can just see something like lighting up in them, a curiosity, a sense of something's resonating, even if they don't fully understand it. And I think some of the other students are just like, wow, what the hell is he talking about? It just doesn't click for them, but that's okay. I do have a bias, which is that discovering, the nature of reality, if you will, and its ultimately infinite, unresolvable, indeterminate nature, has incredible pragmatic value for human beings in terms of resolving suffering, or at least lessening suffering. So that's probably more than anything what motivates me to share with people about it, because I know the benefits of this kind of investigation, that it can bear just remarkable fruit in a human life. I mean, there's no question about it.
Well, I saw it in your albums. I mean, in your songs, because I listened to your albums online,
Mhm.
and they're beautiful.
Oh, thank
And
you.
we'll list a link underneath this podcast for people to check it out, because they're really, well, for me, they're bhakti. They're very devotional. They're very, I don't want to call them hymn-like, because that's not what they are, but
Mhm.
you could almost get that feeling of that church feeling that is devotional. And do you have a bhakti side to you, John?
It's funny you say that, because I really did at one point in my life. As we kind of typically think of bhakti, in fact, my early songwriting was very. My first kind of teacher was Yogananda, and he was definitely a bhakti. Kind of. He talked a lot about love, and we prayed to talked a lot about God, and we would we would sing chants to God, and we would kind of worship God, even though it was also about self-realization, realizing that we are, this divinity. It still had that very devotional kind of aspect to it. And so my early kind of spiritual explorations were more around that. And I think dispositionally, I have a part of that in me for sure. I think it takes more the shape now of someone just made a comment on a recent YouTube video of mine, and they said, I so appreciate your reverence for the mystery. And it feels that way to me sometimes. It just feels like, I don't know, it's just, I mean, we are this extraordinary miracle of life. I mean, that's what we're made of. At the same time, I can feel sometimes this sense of just absolute awe and reverence for it. It's just astonishing, isn't it? I mean, it's just sometimes brings you to your knees. And so probably some of that comes through just the way I talk about things, and also have my music, I can imagine, probably reflecting a little bit of that for
Okay,
sure.
so this actually gets back to the question I asked you on your Zoom call, and we'll
Okay.
try and kind of dissect it a little bit so it's not so broad and there doesn't need to be. But the whole Bhakti thing, the
Mhm.
devotional thing, is a
Yeah.
vibratory thing. You feel it in the heart. I mean, I have those heart experiences myself. That's the
Hmm.
where I'm directed, and it is because of my uh, the way I'm made up as an individual,
Hmm.
that those feelings, my solar plexus, my heart center, they all react to those things. And I feel that devotional thing, I feel that vibratory thing. But
Hmm.
in your sense of non-duality, don't you feel that there's some kind of a is there a separation between that heart, that vibratory center, and and I don't want to call it a belief system because I know there's going to be a lot of controversy about that, but
Hmm.
that believing in that non-dual state of being, can you kind of direct me there?
I mean, for me, I don't know, there's not a contradiction somehow. It's like, I mean, one way I talk about it is there's just, all there is perspective. There's perspective on this reality that's ultimately beyond all perspectives. And one, is it, are there three of us here having a conversation, or is there one being? Well, that sounds like, how do you reconcile those two perspectives? Well, here they are. There's three people having a conversation, and from another perspective, there's one existence here, one being here, one reality here that appears as three individuals. So it's kind of similar to me where, I can have the experience, I can feel into and appreciate the perspective of there's just one thing here. There's just one thing. And that one thing dances as the individual known as John, and John can experience at times this sense of awe and wonder and reverence for the miracle of this that I am, that is everyone and everything, and call that devotion, call that. So yeah, so they don't feel like somehow irreconcilably incompatible, those two perspectives of, because the devotional perspective has a kind of sense of dualism in it, like, I'm worshiping something outside of myself and praying to something outside of myself, or um but yeah, I mean, um it's yeah, I mean, this single reality dances as a multiplicity, clearly, doesn't it? And that can be in seeming relationship with itself, like we can be in relationship with one another, even if I can't tell where you end and I begin if I really look. There's a lot of ways we can seemingly talk about it and kind of structuralize it and talk about bhakti or gyan yoga or non-duality or duality, or all these ways we can frame what's going on here, seemingly frame it in language, in concepts. And this is what we do as humans, and this is how we discuss things, whether it's spirituality or politics or relationships or whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that. But just to say that there is this other perspective on reality, which is really at the heart of what I'm sharing, which is that when we really look at what's going on here, when we feel into what's going on here, we can discover something that's truly mind exploding and mind blowing, and I would say ultimately transformative. And that is that in reality's infinite nature, it is absolutely impossible to say what it is. to determine what it is. It is that transcendental. It is that it will not be put in any box, no matter how hard we may try to put it. It is that transcendental. And that is where all of my explorations have led to that conclusion. I think it might have been Nisargadatta, I'm not sure, who said, the final understanding is that there is no understanding. And that is, wow. I mean, it just, it's hard to say like how the kind of impact that has to see that. What's that old gate, parasam gate, gone, beyond. Funny enough, that's not a removal from life. It's actually just a recognition that our so-called everyday life, our so-called normal human existence is absolute transcendental infinity through and through and through. It looks like something that I can identify and go, oh, here I am having a conversation over Zoom. Then what could be more identifiable and normal everyday thing I do all the time? But if I really look at the experience that I'm describing as sitting, having a conversation on Zoom, it's like a portal into absolute indefinability, absolute. When I say, I use the word infinity a lot, and what I mean by that is when you explore your experience, when I explore my experience, what's here, not assume that I know what it is. I discover that it has no end to it. It has no final. If I keep exploring experience, I have a chapter in my last book called The Bottomless Well of Infinity. And I say, if your experience was like a well and you're going to explore it so you can get to the fucking bottom of what it is, right? So I can finally come up with like, now I have my religion to declare to the world, this is what it is. This is how it is. It's like, and you explore the well of your experience, you never get to the bottom of it. You never arrive at a landing place like, haha, eureka, I found the answer, the secret code. Here it is. It's like, no, sorry. I mean, that's my experience. I could be wrong. Maybe maybe it is finite and I can get to the bottom of it and I can write a thesis on it and present that. And well, I don't know, maybe that's true. Everything experientially, intuitively, and rationally tells me, no, it's absolute infinity. And, I was having a conversation I do these individual sessions with people, kind of inquiry sessions. And one of the people that reached out to me turned out to be a quantum physicist. And we had this remarkable conversation. I was really getting schooled by him about quantum physics as it relates to what we were exploring in the meeting. And he said to me something I had felt and intuited, as much as I'm ignorant really about math and physics. And he said that the mathematics that physicists are using to describe the nature of reality, I mean, these are like the hardest of hard scientists, the physicists. And they've reached a point where their description of reality is mathematical, right? The very math that physicists are using to describe reality is based on infinities. The calculus is based on infinities that have no resolution. I use the example of pi. We use pi, we can use pi to solve problems, build bridges. What is pi? Well, it's a value, mathematical value, 3.14. There you go, right? But it keeps going, doesn't it? It's 3.1415, and then it has no resolution. And this physicist told me, this is really fascinating, John. Using pi to do engineering projects or whatever, you really only need to bring pi out like a couple of digits to make use of it. Like you can actually use it and make predictions based on pi and so on. He said, but the truth is we don't know what pi is and we never will. And I said to him, so would you say from a physics standpoint, we'll never arrive at a final conclusion of what's fundamental to reality? And he said, of course not, because it's infinite. And what I say, whether we're looking at the objective pole, matter, let's say, whatever matter is, or the subjective pole of human experience, interestingly, we arrive at the same discovery, which is this is unresolvable infinity. And why that's so powerful is that we imagine ourselves as these vulnerable creatures existing in a vast world, a world that at every turn, the circumstances and experiences we could encounter could overwhelm us, threaten us, feel like we're caught in something, entangled in something, stressed by something, and on and on and on and it goes. And that's a lot of human life, isn't it? And then we're trying to sort it all out and resolve this and fix this and navigate that, and right. And fair enough. I mean, that's part of life, it would seem, but it's not the whole story, because from this unresolvable perspective, none of that is actually happening, not in the way we imagine it to be. None of it. There's not a separate individual here navigating a world, not from this other perspective. There's just absolute infinity. You could say infinity sitting inside of infinity, sitting inside of infinity, sitting inside of infinity. It's a very different perspective on life, needless to say.
The friend you never see.
Yeah, you can never see it. You never resolve it. You can never get to the bottom of it because you can't, there it is. I found it. It's like, no, you'll never see it.
Right.
That's freedom. Exactly. Boy, I never imagined that would be where my explorations all these decades would lead to. I thought I'd have it all figured out. Nope, apparently not.
Gary's got it figured out, though, right, Gary?
Well, yeah, I got it all figured out. It's turtles all the way down.
There you go.
Right?
Infinite turtles all the way down.
There you go. It's very simple. Very simple.
Right. If I guess if there's any obstacle to us discovering that that the infinity all the way down the bottomless bottom of the well is our belief that we actually already know what it is, that we're pretty convinced, and language kind of colludes with that in a sense, or language is so facile, right? If I have all these words to describe my experience, and we do, right? It kind of suggests that we know what the hell we're talking about because we have ways of seemingly describing it. And, but that turns out to be a fantasy from my standpoint, ultimately.
It's a fantasy, but as you point out with pi, you can use it.
You can still use the fantasy, right?
See, that's what I'm saying. So you can use it. So
you can email me and say, hey, let's meet over Zoom, on Wednesday, October 16th. It's like, okay, and here we are.
Yeah.
we just used it.
We can use it, even though it's unresolvable.
That's right.
It's infinite. We don't know what it is. We don't have to, in a sense. And the most important thing for me in all this, because you brought it up, is this idea of relieving suffering. You could say it's all an illusion. There is no suffering because there's no one to suffer. Blah blah blah. This is the hardcore non-dual point of view. But practically speaking, again, we can use it. We don't have to go all the way down with the pi. We can relieve suffering because it's possible. And I think that's what we're doing. That's what I'm doing. I don't know what you guys are doing.
That's beautifully said, Gary. I agree wholeheartedly that it's really a wild thing to when you were saying that, like, we can have an agreement to meet, over Zoom. We can do this. And does it just explode your brain to realize, like, we can do this even if we have no idea what it is? Like, at the same time, like, what? Wait a minute. Like I said the other day on one of my Zooms, I was like drinking a glass of water. I'm like, I can drink a glass of water, even though I have no idea what water is, what I am, how to even do this, what any of this is. It's like, but it's like, yeah, it's crazy. It's just so crazy.
Well, that's why I go into these podcasts. Like people say, "Well, what are you going to ask, John? Or what are you going to do?" I have a whole pile of notes that I got. I have a whole pile of notes that I got from our Sunday experience with you on your every Sunday. But I'm saying I still don't know, because this whole thing has gone a completely different direction, right? I plunge in and say, okay, now I'm going to, and bingo, it's off on a different thing. So that's the way it, but I love that. That's the way it is, because it's the unpredictability of it and the unresolvability. And you know what? None of these questions need resolving, but they may be interesting. It may be of interest to bring up, to pop up. I have a few axe to grind, I must admit, but I think I'm doing that in the thing of, like, again, using the pie. We're going to use it to do what? To relieve suffering.
Grind away, baby.
So I know that we have a lot of mutual friends who are coming out like the walking wounded from the Balanced View organization or cult. So I was hoping to bring that up, again, not to slam any guru or anything, because I got plenty of gurus to slam if I want to. I don't want to, but to help those people in our group, who are struggling with this whole thing of coming out of the cult. And Stefan and I go back to an earlier cult where there's the same situation. A lot of people come out of the cult and keep going and keep moving, and everything's great. And other people come out, and they never kind of recover. So I wanted to address that issue with you and see what you had to say about that.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot that I guess it could be said about it. I think obviously within the panoply of spiritual teachings and approaches that are out there in the world, there is one version, we could call it guru yoga, in the sense that the teacher or the guru or the Rinpoche or whatever becomes very central in the whole exploration. And I've always been skeptical about that. And even though I've been involved with different teachers over the course of my life, not many, but a few. And I feel like, and I've benefited from my engagement with different teachers enormously. But what I've observed, I think maybe I'm just wired less to kind of fall into what I consider to be the trap of believing the teacher has something I don't have. Let's say that's one aspect of the trap. This kind of putting them on a particular kind of pedestal. I mean, this is so much to miss the point of what the teachings are about, to me, which is exploring your experience and discovering what it is and discovering what you are made of, fundamentally, what reality is made of, this pure, miraculous, inconceivable, transcendental divinity, for lack of a better way to put it. And man, it just, my own observations of, you mentioned one particular teaching, we don't need to go into the details of it, but how off the rails things can seem to go when the attention gets, I think, innocently, if you will, misplaced onto the teacher or the teaching, and then that becomes the focus. What is it? The old, mistaking the finger pointing to the moon for the moon, right? It's like, what is this about? This is about, it's interesting in some of those discussions, and I've seen this in another group that I was a part of, where there's a lot of processing for folks about their having left the group and the damage they feel that they encountered personally as a result of their involvement with the group. And it's complicated. I mean, some people can come out of these situations of, shall we say, dysfunctional groups, spiritual groups, and really be kind of reeling, as you said, from it. And that might go on for years, where it feels like something continues to be kind of unresolved for them about what happened. And that's its own separate sort of how people come to some peace around what happened is, I mean, that's a process for people that is unique to each person, whether we're talking about coming out of the your early childhood experiences and difficulties and traumas, or coming out of a spiritual organization and all of that. And we don't need to get into that because I think it's just it's too complicated to even be able to address, I think. But it's so clear that I might be hopefully elucidating something and pointing to something for them to look at with respect to their own experience that's of value, and help open some doors of perception vis-a-vis the way I talk about this stuff and engage with people. That's I hope that that's the case, that something about what I'm sharing is evocative of what it is I'm trying to convey. But it's so clear that how could this possibly be about me? Like it's such a non sequitur. Like what? Like I can't even fathom how it is that happens, where it becomes about a charismatic figure. But boy, is that not an uncommon story. And I remember writing something in a previous book, like in the final analysis, I said in the book, this has nothing to do with gurus, with teachings, with any of that stuff. It has to do with you exploring your experience and discovering what it is. That's it, And, I think what I have observed, I was going to say in these couple of groups that I was in, and being part of sort of online sort of support groups, if you will, as people kind of navigate their departures from these groups, sometimes over years. I mean, particular group you mentioned that's been around for years, right? People still processing their experience years later. I think one of the sort of sad, kind of tragic outcomes I've observed is that it almost seems like people feel so burned by those experiences that what it was fundamentally really about, this discovery of this transcendental reality that they are and everything is, almost gets like where you don't even see that entering into the conversations. It's like, but what about, like, okay, so some things were majorly off in a way that was arguably very dysfunctional, but what about what you were exploring in terms of the nature of this and what you were discovering? I mean, that's what's interesting to me. Like, I don't, you know what I mean? Like but that often is like becomes very secondary, and maybe people even feel like, um, I don't know, kind of more cynical about that stuff, and because of the negative experiences they had exploring it in the context of the group, the cult.
That's the sad part, because you point out they're missing the whole point of why were you there in the first place, and what did you get, relative to that initial intention, instead of coming out, angry, mad, sad, vindictive. And that's why I brought it up, because not only in the group that you and I were a part of, but the group earlier in my career that Stefan and I were a part of had the same story. Years and years and years later, some of these people are still going through what you just described, like missing the whole point. Why were they there in the first place? What were they exploring? No, now it's all about the bad guru. In essence, really, and missing what is not only was available there in the organization, call it a cult, call it a spiritual organization, doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
And now just, nursing those wounds. That I find that, so sad and disturbing in a way.
But everybody's trauma is different. I mean, when I left, I transitioned out of there relatively smoothly.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't leave with animosity, so to speak. And actually, it wasn't until I left in 76, 77, and it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't until after the person who was the head of the cult passed away, and I found out all of these things that were going on that I did not have any information about, that I started to get a different viewpoint or feeling about. But there were people that left that
Mm-hmm.
had some very deep trauma experiences there. And you had someone on your Zoom call who had in a great part of her life experienced depression and other deep set
Mhm.
things that were traumatic. And the way you explained it to her, and she said that it was not a traumatic experience of coming out of this state the way you explained it to her, because it was in such a flow that allowed her to move out without further trauma,
Mhm.
mental trauma about her situation. And but there are people that left that did experience abuse, and their traumatic situation based on their own physiological sensibilities really have
Yeah.
kept them in the dark for this long. They cannot get rid of it, you know? So
No, I mean, you're right. Everyone, also people in these organizations, where shit happens, that is leads people to leave and then spend time sort of processing what happened and trying to resolve, whatever they experienced that was difficult or even traumatizing. Um, it's some of that depends on their own psychological makeup and what brought them to the teaching in the first place, which, who knows? It's complicated. And also, I know in the case of both organizations I was part of that I feel like, I mean, I uninvolved myself for some of the reasons we're talking about. Um, I didn't get in that deep, I didn't. I mean, in some ways, I would say I drank the Kool-Aid, but not completely. And I think that maybe facilitated my leaving in a way that didn't leave like a sense of residue somehow. It was like, and I just count my lucky stars maybe that I have that. I don't know. One of my teachers over the years was Adyashanti, and he he used to like to say, people think they come to a spiritual teaching organization and they think that what they should be doing is leave their kind of critical mind like at the door. And he said that's the exact opposite. And I
right.
always appreciated him saying that. And I'm just kind of wired that way to not leave my critical mind at the door. So I think that's kept me in better stead when it's come to extricating myself from some of those situations. But no, it's a hornet's nest, and there's I don't know. Sometimes it almost seems like more the norm than not that a figure becomes a central focus of the teaching, and even in some traditions, that's considered the way it should be. That the guru yoga, the focus on the guru is central. Is central. In fact, you can't make it without that kind of connection, right? I mean, you even in the Tibetan tradition, for example, like there's visualizations people do about the infallible nature of the teacher, and sort of seeing this as a way of like discovering your own infallible Buddha nature, to see that, project that onto the teacher. It's like, wow, that's a slippery slope.
Well,
in a human way.
isn't there a difference between a seeker and a wanter or a needer? Someone that wants to be part of this situation, but really isn't seeking. They need the whole group experience. Yet the seeker doesn't leave the critical mind at the door, comes in with questions, and they either resonate with the teacher or the path that they just entered or not, and then they move on. But then there's the wanter who gets kind of like stuck in that needy position. Do you think that there's a differentiation there?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, it's complicated. I would be hesitant, very hesitant to kind of psychologize and psychoanalyze why it might be that some people have the experiences that they have and come out of it feeling very, um, I mean, listen, flat out abuse can and does happen in those groups sometimes, and why. I mean, geez, like what Jim Jones, I mean, what 900 people like committed suicide. I mean, there's an
Wow.
extreme example where the
Right.
devotion to the guru and the surrendering of any kind of critical thinking on the part of the participants because they were convinced that this person knew the truth. That's one wildly extreme end of the spectrum of how dysfunctional that kind of what that can lead to. Yeah, but how it is that people come to do that, books have been written about it, right? The mind of what happens in kind of these cult-like settings. But I mean, for my purposes, it's like whenever it feels like it's called for, I'm emphasizing over and over again that it doesn't really happen. I don't experience people projecting stuff onto me, but I mean, if they are, I'm not aware of it. But if I ever identify it, it's like I'm going to make it very clear, like it has nothing to do.
Wait,
Nothing.
hold on, John. You mean you're not a perfect master?
Well, I mean,
Look, come on. Don't destroy my faith in you.
This may be the last podcast we ever have because Gary looks like he's really distraught now.
He's very distraught. I know.
I'm gonna quit. I'm gonna quit the path and go back to duality.
Oh my goodness. And it's like, and again, to say that in the same way, I'm sure the two of you have been inspired by mentors and teachers in life. I mean, this is a beautiful part of life to be inspired by another, to have the way somebody talks about something and points to something can be profoundly transformative. I mean, I have like nothing but gratitude for the mentors in my life. Like, it's a beautiful aspect of life. But it's not ultimately what it's about. It's about discovering what you are, what life is. And if a teacher can facilitate that, that's a beautiful thing. But yeah, the point of the point is that the devotees become, realized, right? But boy, that can get lost sight of, fast, right? Where it's like no one can ever quite reach the status of the guru. It's like, oh my God, really? Wait, I thought the whole point of the teaching was for that to happen. So
that's right, and that's why I love Nisargadatta, who you mentioned earlier, so much, because what he would say, unlike so many of the teachers that I came across in my life, he said, I'm not here to make you a disciple. No, my purpose is to make you a master. Whereas some of the teachers that I came across are like, no, you're a disciple, and you're going to be there for 17 incarnations before you get the Shakti pot or whatever. But Nisargadatta would say, no, it's not about being a disciple. Just what you're saying, John. It's like, no, I'm here to make you a master. So unless the disciple or the devotee attains the same realization as the master, then like, what's the point? Just to stay in that one down position, and that the master is realized, but I could never be because I'm just a lowly whatever low consciousness individual. So that's a key point as far as I'm concerned.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like the job of the spiritual teacher, and I feel similarly with the job of a good therapist, is to put yourself out of business, right? Come on. That's the point. It's about freedom, not dependency. Boy, that point gets lost more often than not, I'm afraid.
That was my problem was the guru. I wanted information. I'm a simple guy. Just explain to me what it's like. And the guru would always talk in metaphors and aphorisms. And it was like, okay, it's going to take me a lifetime just to figure out what the you're talking about here. Okay. And then I find other people that just are able to put it in common terms, which for me, I mean, okay, I like all the bells and whistles. That's how I respond. I like the whole heart thing. When I feel a resonance, it's like, oh, You know, I've
Mhm.
had this incredible experience and all of that.
Yeah.
That for me is my experience, and I'll go along on the path, and I'll I'll break something down here and break something down there, and it'll become more understandable. But I just wanted a practical understanding of how it's done. And everybody says, well, you can't tell anybody how it's done. You got to figure it out for yourself. Bullshit. You can give some instructions, some guidance in order to start the thing off and continue it going without you getting totally confused. Now, I felt that in your um, Zoom call,
Mm.
the way you explained it to people. I mean, you are a psychologist, so you understand that you've got to explain things in a way people can understand them rather than in these lofty kind of. And even what I read at the beginning, the experience you had when you went to the retreat,
Mhm.
you had that moment that it was like, ah. And even though your experiences continued on after that and broadened itself, that one moment was that locking of that door that kind of like led you down the rest of the way. Is that, am I saying it right?
It's a good question. I'll tell you, I in some spiritual kind of non-dual circles, there's a seems to be a kind of a fascination with people sort of sharing their awakening stories and the moment, and I am really not interested in that myself, and I'll tell you why. Um, I think it's listen, can there be seminal moments in our life where the doors of perception are open in such a profound way, transformative way that our life has changed? For sure, that can happen. But the whole point of what I'm talking about is that freedom or awakening or um, is not a particular experience. It's every experience. So when we start privileging certain experiences over others and elevating them over others and making them more important than others, we're missing something, you know, fundamental. Like I say, whether it's a spiritual experience, an awakening experience that's facilitated by a psychedelic or a meeting with a teacher or being on retreat or just whatever, just dumb luck. You're just walking down the street and get hit over the head or whatever by life. It's like what I say to people is, and I really feel this strongly, that the really important experiences, for speaking in terms of things about spirituality and awakening and such, are the ones that reveal that what we're looking for is in every experience. In other words, it's not tied to that particular experience. And I see people, someone was recently telling me about an experience with psychedelics that really opened up this discovery that there's one thing here, it's undivided, it's absolutely sacred, right? And and I notice there can be this tendency to keep going back to that experience as a reference point, which is fine because it illuminated something very profound and very true. But I'm like reminding them, because I'm in a position to do that because I know them well, like what you saw on that psychedelic journey is what's actually here right now. It really is. And that's the key, is to discover how it is also here right now without having to go back in memory about your awakening experience or your psychedelic experience or whatever it was. And so this right now, like this moment here, the three of us chatting, this is the awakening. This is the moment. This is a moment of, I mean, isn't this the absolute miracle of reality appearing as this instant? This is it. This is all the Shakti. This is all the transmission. This is all the, it's all here.
John,
This is,
I was about to say, in case you don't know it already, this is it. And I want to say something because you
yeah,
mentioned that whole gate thing. Well, you
yeah.
know what? Gate, beyond, beyond, beyond. But what's the conclusion of that? Bodhi swaha. It's right here. That, other shore or whatever you're going is here right now. And I think this is the major point. I think this right here, right now, is the major takeaway from this whole great, elaborate conversation we've had. That it's not about a particular experience, because let's face it, you've seen this, and I've seen this with many people. One of the big bugaboos of spirituality or spiritual path is like, oh, I had this great transcendental experience. I'm imagining, I'm talking about myself now, way back in 1972, and now I have to get back to 1972 because that was the reality, missing the whole point that this is it. That was it then. This is it now.
Well, exactly. And that you were sharing from my conversation with Rick on that interview way however many years ago, Stefan, about, that I had this big kind of moment that I would describe as this remarkable awakening moment. And it was very transformative. It was revealing that what I'd been searching for had never been absent. It was like, holy shit. It was really a very important moment. And then I noticed, I think the same day, amazingly enough, that sense of that energy of like wanting more, like I want another experience like that. I could feel it. It was like, whoa, I couldn't believe it was there, because it was like the experience was essentially showing me that I didn't need to find something other than what is, because what is it. It's like, it's God. So, and I'm like looking for more God. It was like, realized, wait a minute. It was like, it was so confusing. And that's when I heard, the only time I've ever heard it in my life, before or after, felt like a kind of like a voice of reality. Like it was reality's own kind of Zen slap, hitting the stick of reality. Like, John, can you see how much is already here? Like, just stop for a moment. Like, we search for a sense of wholeness and completeness and aliveness. It's like, just look at what's here. I mean, it's overflowing. It's overflowing with, it's bountiful beyond measure. It's just a matter of looking and seeing. And this is always true. It's never missing anything. It's never incomplete. It's never, and you know what? We get to see that as many as times as we seem like we need to see that again and again and again, sometimes, maybe thousands of times. And, because the process of this in my own life has been one of a kind of continual wearing away of the belief that it's somewhere else, the belief that there could be some other moment that could be a little bit better. It's like, really?
Well, that happened to me. I'm sorry, Gary. That happened to me most of my life, because I always lived in the city, where the energy in New Jersey and New York City, the energy was always frenetic. So I was being bombarded by all of this kind of like energy that was, I couldn't see anything. And then in my late 70s, we moved to Vermont, and I could finally see, because that energy was gone. And now I was just open to the natural environment around me, the beauty of what was. And all of a sudden I realized I was never really seeing, I was just looking. And now finally I can see what it is, besides just feeling this thing inside of me. I now have a reference point that makes it now, that makes it in this moment, how important this moment is, and how unimportant this moment is, because it's just, it's transitional.
It's definitely transitional. In fact, it's already gone before it's even here. So that's how transitional it is. Now, how weird is that?
It's weird, man. It's weird.
Like, the power of now. Well, okay, I'd like you to try to grasp hold of now and see how long you can put it in your hands for. It's like, you can't. But that turns out to be the most remarkable thing to discover, that it's never here for any time whatsoever. And yet, magically, mysteriously, a whole world seems to be appearing out of this thing that's here for no time. I mean, that can sound like abstract and philosophical, but it's literally like what we're encountering palpably, empirically. We're feeling, if you feel this, you can feel that it's ungraspable. You can feel that it's here for no time. And yet the world of it seemingly enduring people, places, and things carries on, doesn't it? Here we are, There seems to be an enduring nature to something, and yet it's more mirage-like than that. It really is not enduring at all. It's just up in a puff of smoke.
It is a mirage, right?
It's crazy. I mean, it's just my friend Peter Brown, who's been a very influential mentor in my life, he used to say it's weirder than weird. It's like it's weirdness, squared to the whatever nth degree. In terms of weird in the sense of like, it's just you can't put it in a neat and tidy little conceptual package and say like, oh, this is how it is. It's not like that. Not my experience.
I'm glad you mentioned Peter Brown, John, because that was I was going to say, we've been here for quite a while. I'm gonna like not get involved with all these notes. Let's do another. We would definitely want to do another session down the road. But I did want to bring up Peter Brown. That was my thing because you may know these people from the West Coast because they were very involved with Peter too. Steve Fulmer and Leif. So
yeah, I know them both. Yeah.
Yeah. So the three of us are running a group in POK, which is the organization I mentioned, my current cult. But it's nice. It's cult light. I like it. The yoga of radiant presence. We're running a group. But then I discovered through your email or whatever, you're starting a group with this new book of Peter's. Peter died, but his compilation, Liberation Beyond Imagination. I signed up for that. I think maybe Leif and Steve did too. I told them about it. So that's starting up in October sometime, 29th. I'm looking forward to that. I think we could do 2 more shows. One on all the stuff I jotted down I want to talk about from your just half hour of Zoom because I came in late, and Peter Brown. So, but I don't know. I don't think we have much time left for this one. So maybe we want to tie it up. I do want to say one thing though, of everything that came out of today, and it was so much. It was so rich. It was so juicy. I think the main takeaway is, from my point of view, and I think people spiritual seekers really need to get this, in my point of view, is that meaning liberation, enlightenment, awakening, transitioning, whatever you want to call it, is not an experience. And you made that so clear. It's not, no matter how exalted, that experience is no different, essentially, than the perfectly ordinary experience of buying milk and bread and eggs. In other words, it's all, it's to get back to our, Dzogchen teaching, equal and even in the great expanse. And we learned a good thing in our experience because we learned taking short moments of just like, what's here right now? This is it.
Well, that's that idea that everything is equal, that comes out of the Tibetan tradition. At least that's the only place I ever heard that initially. Is, how do we discover that? How do we because again, as I said at the outset, the way we're defining and describing the world, it's anything but equal. Everything is different and distinct. And then there's a kind of hierarchy that emerges out of the way we're describing the world. This is better than that. This is different than that. This is more important than that. This is more awakened than that. That's the hierarchy, right? And that is one way we experience life, to be sure, right? I prefer pleasure over pain. There's a kind of hierarchy there. But what is this equalness thing then? How is pleasure equal to pain? Well, then I would say we have to discover something about experience that is the same. What is that? And that is the question of questions. What is the same about joy and sorrow? What is essential about joy and what is essential about sorrow? And we can discover that. We could say what is the same about everything is that it is. Its existence, its suchness, its beingness, its presence. Those are all kind of synonyms. But the other way I sometimes put it is that, to your point about it's not a particular experience, I say, no, freedom is not found in particular experiences. It's found in the flow of experiencing itself.
What a beautiful way to end this ongoing conversation. It's
ongoing,
present in all. It's present in all experiences. Gary, I think it's time. This was a wonderful conversation we had. I'm hoping that we can come back with John again and spend another hour or so, because it's so informative. And I think people are really looking for this kind of opening to move their lives into something without all of the kind of difficult foundering of finding a spiritual path or something, because it's not about that. It's just about them discovering themselves and awakening to what is really right in front of them.
Well said.
Yeah, well said. I agree. And definitely, we have at least one more podcast to do with John at some point down the road, because we got so much more to cover. But I believe fully that just watching what we have here, I don't know, however long it's going to be when you get the final edition, is going to be so rich and so valuable. I can't wait to get posted out to all my groups, all my spiritual groups and cults and things. I can't wait to get it out there. It's going to be great. So thanks, John.
Thanks,
Well,
guys. Pleasure to chat with you. Yeah.
I just want to say before we leave, I think I found a friend that I can see. So
there you go. I love it.
bless you.
Well, thank you. It's lovely
Good
to
one.
be
That
with
was
you
a
guys.
good one, Stefan. Yeah. Okay. Post-game analysis. Post-game.
That was great. He's a very interesting soul.
John is great. He's totally 100% real, down to earth, no airy-fairy spiritual teacher going on about him. He's a musician. He's a psychologist. He's a teacher, a spiritual teacher, and he's got a wealth of experience and things to say.
Well,
It's great.
Getting a straightforward kind of presentation without all the bullshit around it, without all the stars and stripes and all of that kind of stuff.
Right.
It kind of makes you feel. It gives you a sense that you can at least listen, analyze what he has to say. If it resonates with you, fine. If it doesn't, move on to something else. But he's pragmatic. I mean, he puts it in a way that we can all understand. I really enjoyed this session with him. It was awesome.
I thought it was great, and I'm so glad we kept the recording going. I know you're going to have to edit out a lot of this stuff because a lot of it personal, whatever, blah blah blah, and also time frame. But I know you'll put together a great package because John says a lot of great things, and I know it will be a benefit to at least some people who tune in and as you say, completely practical. No, none of this airy fairy. It's like practical, down to earth. And I just hope a lot of people see it.
Well, the people that have seen our past podcasts, the few that we have done already, have been pretty positive about it. I mean, they've heard their comments have been, wow, that was, I really enjoyed that. I learned something from that. And that's really what it's all about. I mean, we're here to show that there are just regular people out there, that are having the experience. This is what their experience is like. You too can have your own experience. Doesn't have to go the same way, but here's the information. And, that's it.
That's what it's all about. Everyday, ordinary people having extraordinary realizations or epiphanies or whatever, and talking about it, communicating about it. It's not about having some exalted spiritual master here. Ordinary people, ordinary situations. And okay, and who's our next guest?
Our next guest is Robert and Marianne. Robert is a dear friend of mine, as is Marianne, but I've known Robert for a long time. He's an author, a filmmaker. We'll go over the books he's written, Letters from 500. Marianne is also a psychologist, and she has some interesting thoughts about non-duality that she wants to bring up. So I think it's going to be a really interesting session. We're going to do this next week, and yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I can't wait for that. Especially, we had one psychologist today. John was a psychologist, and now Marianne is a psychologist. So let's see. Let's get there. Let's see what they have to say. Robert and Marianne. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm pumped for all these things because they're all interesting because everybody's unique and everybody has a unique journey.
Absolutely. And I want you to go out and have your unique journey and have a really wonderful experience today, Gary.
No, Stefan, I'm not going anywhere. I'm having my own unique journey right here in my recliner. I'm not going anywhere. It's all here.
Recline, baby.
I'm
Recline.
going to recline and take it easy for the rest of the day.
Ciao.
All right. Out of here. I'm out.